I call Jacinda Ardern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Budgets, Mr. Speaker, are not just about the year's plan, what's going to happen in the next 12 months. They're about vision. They're meant to set out where the government wants to take you over the course of even a term, or if they are indeed being visionary beyond the next political cycle. That is what budgets are the opportunity to do. I have sat through what feels like more than my fair share of National Party budgets, and I am still yet to see any evidence of that visionary kind of statement, the kind of thing that actually as a country we need. And we do need it, Mr. Speaker, because we are facing challenges that aren't challenges on a yearly cycle. They're not even challenges on a term of 3 years. They go well beyond that. I wanted to see a budget this time around, Mr. Speaker, that acknowledged the hard decisions and that doing what's right is not always about doing what's popular. And in fact, if any government worth their salt is going to address the issues that are right but not necessarily popular, they should be doing it in the first budget after an election year. They should. But that is not what we have seen in this budget. Labor, Mr. Speaker, always tried to look ahead. Now, we will, of course, always be criticised by the opposing side because that's what they do. But we did ultimately endeavour to look ahead. Our policies demonstrated that. Working for families was essentially about trying to address what we recognised in government was the inequality that was emerging, and it was emerging the most for our families and our low-income families. It was a very tightly crafted attempt at redistribution. And Working for Families has endured as a mechanism because it was to date the most successful attempt a government has made to achieve that. That's why National hasn't gotten rid of it. We brought into play interest-free student loans because we saw the emerging inequality and growing debt for the next generation and the impact that was having on them and their ability to own a home, to become debt-free, and to become contributing citizens. That's what interest-free student loans were all about. We established the super fund because we could see that we had baby boomers that were moving into retirement, that there was growing debt, that we were going to have a spend in the superannuation space that would soon outstrip education, and we simply weren't prepared for it. That is what the super fund, then known as the Cullen Fund, was all about. We stopped calling it the Cullen Fund when the national government stopped contributing to it. But that's why it was established. And of course, that is why KiwiSaver existed, because we knew that the universal super scheme that we had was a bare minimum. If anyone retired without owning a home, they might potentially experience poverty in their retirement. That, Mr. Speaker, was why we brought in KiwiSaver. And the 9 surpluses, well, Mr. Speaker, that was because we could see down in front of us that there was a potential for a global financial crisis. There was a potential that we would hit on hard times. Dr. Cullen prepared New Zealand for that, and that was why we ran 9 budget surpluses. And I remember all of the criticism from that side of the House for the fact that we did, and that we didn't enter into a lolly scramble with tax breaks at that time. And what have we seen from the national government in contrast? Not one surplus yet. For all their criticism of Labor and government, we're still yet to see one surplus. And during our entire time in government, despite that planning that we put in place, all of that thinking ahead about the big challenges New Zealand was facing, the one label that the National Party could come up with was nanny state. That was the argument that we kept getting. We somehow, all that planning that we were doing made us nanny state. Well, if that made us nanny state, the National, they are, in contrast, the babysitter who is now absent. The absent babysitter, not just the absent babysitter, the babysitter that nicked the petty cash and left the kids home alone. That's the kind of government that we've seen from them. Our nation's debt is beyond $86 billion, and it's debt that we all will carry. But unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, as this budget highlights, some will carry that debt more than others. And in fact, it seems the very people that Labor focused its budgets on, because of the inequality we saw, those are the very people that under National's budgets will now carry more of that debt. Let's start with the next generation. Student debt continues to be an issue, Mr. Speaker, but not just about dealing with student loans. We now have a national government who won't even allow students who, for instance, are in a course of study that requires them to be in university more than 7 years to be able to access student loans. Med students cannot afford to complete their degree programs under a national government. And that is just wrong. And we will be paying for that in the future when we don't have enough people in the field who are ready and trained. The next generation are going to be paying for the fact that Kickstarter for KiwiSaver has been wiped out. In fact, under national budgets, we've had 8 changes to KiwiSaver since they've been in government. And if there is one thing that I've heard particularly from the business sector and even the banking sector is that the constant changes to KiwiSaver is undermining the scheme and becoming genuinely problematic. So I beg the national government, no more changes to KiwiSaver. We need consistency, particularly for that next generation. And what else have we done to them? Well, if they live in Auckland, there is no way that they will be purchasing a house anytime soon. And we have put out multiple ideas to the government because we simply cannot wait for the next election to implement the changes we need. We've put out ideas around what we need them to do, and still they have unfortunately not been adopted, and houses continue to earn more than people. The next generation also needed this budget to focus on jobs. There's almost no mention of any kind of mechanism that's focused on job creation. Small business, the ones that produced 41% of our jobs last year, what did they get in this budget? If I'm being generous, I might point out that there's some funding that's being put aside for the national business number, but that's actually about it. That is actually it. So as much as Craig Foss comes down to this House and trumpets how much his government cares about small business, that is mere rhetoric until they do anything meaningful, and there was certainly nothing meaningful in this budget. But it's not just, Mr. Speaker, about the next generation. It's also about the next generation of currently children living in low-income families. We know that children who grow up in poverty bear the effects of that poverty in their adult life, even if they get beyond that poverty themselves. And that manifests itself, unfortunately, in terms of their health outcomes. Yes, we absolutely, on this side of the House, welcome the $25 increase to those families who are living in benefit households. But I do want to point out, it was not the first increase in 40 years. Far from it. Like the national government, Labor targeted families living on benefits with working for families. The family tax credit went to families on benefits. That was the last big increase for beneficiary families with children. Jonathan Naylor seems to have not... You weren't in the House, Jonathan, so perhaps you don't realise that. But he wasn't elected, not absent, Mr. McIntyre. So that is why perhaps he wasn't aware of that fact, so we'll be generous on that side. But perhaps you might have been able to make that claim if you made a generic increase to benefits, but the national government hasn't. It is targeted to beneficiary families with children, which is what the family tax credit did. But Mr. Speaker, if they're genuinely focused on raising children out of poverty, why are there no numbers on how many families are being lifted out of poverty by this measure? Why are there absolutely no numbers prepared by MSD or Treasury? I imagine Jonathan Boston's quote perhaps illustrates why we've seen no numbers or calculations. He said, quote, "With the exception of beneficiary families who secure income from paid employment for part or any specified period, the changes to benefit rates announced in the budget will not reduce rates of child poverty measured on the basis of family income." They will not reduce the rates. And why? Because the gap for those families has become so large that $25 won't do it. And the reason I know that is because when we formulated Best Start, I did the calculations myself. You need at least something like the Best Start payment, which was $60 per child, not per family, if you genuinely want to make a difference. So I lay this challenge, Mr. Speaker, to the National Party. If they are serious about changing child poverty, amend the bill to make it per child. Tell us how many families will be lifted out of poverty, and try and do something that is genuine, not token. And then I genuinely may believe that you're doing something visionary.